G'day Jafffa Adventures, Terry King here. Welcome to the channel. You want to see me turn this bonnet off my FJ45 and this bonnet off a 79 Series Landcruiser into this? Stick around. So the first question you might be asking is, why? Why would I do that? And the answer to that is quite simple. It's my car, I could do what I want. This is not an original vehicle by a long shot. I've got a supercharged LSA sitting here under what will soon be the bonnet. It's got a 79 Series tub grafted onto the back of it and a 6-speed automatic transmission. So this puppy is far from stock. The second reason is my stock bonnet is toast. If I zoom in, you can see underneath here, that's all rotted out. It's got a big crease here along the back side of it, small bit of cancer here on the side, and the front edge is all rotted out as well. Now to keep that bonnet stock, I have to replace that, but the biggest thing is dealing with that large crease over the back side. I've already done the 79 Series bonnet scoop grafted onto my 200 Series, so I've got a little bit of form in this, and I think I know what I'm doing, but you'll have to wait to the end of the video to find out whether that's actually going to be the case or not. Now, I'm not the first to graft a 79 Series bonnet scoop onto a 40 Series Cruiser. Lots have done it before. And of the photos that I've seen, I haven't been particularly pleased with how it's been done. Now, I don't know whether I can do any better, but I'm certainly going to give it a crack. Now, if any of these bonnets are yours, no disrespect intended. In fact, I'd like to thank you guys for giving me ideas and helping me determine what I do and don't like. On this one, I like that they used the plastic insert, and you'll actually see what I mean a bit later in this video. On this one, you can see there is no insert and it looks a bit barren to me. Also, the scoop looks a bit angled or tilted rearward to me. I do like how they integrated the scoop into the bonnet, however. It does look rather clean. On this scoop, I'm not a fan of the retention of that original bonnet hump that runs down the center of the bonnet. This is a fiberglass scoop, and I'd rather steel panels as I find the lines are a bit more crisp. I'm also not a fan of these Frankenstein fasteners that are protruding from the bonnet. In all these bonnets, however, you can see that they fit in between these two ridges on the original factory bonnet. This is important and will give me a bit of grief in terms of planning and fabricating a bit later on in my project. You should also notice that this is an early model 79 Series bonnet. In August of 2018, they went from the bonnet scoop with the short hump to the bonnet scoop with the tall hump, like I've got on my 200 Series now. Now you can see on the 200 Series that high bonnet scoop actually looks pretty good. Definitely doesn't look out of place on the 200 because it's such a tall and a wide vehicle. I specifically chose the bonnet scoop with the small hump because of the design of the FJ45. It's a relatively tall and narrow car, and I think with a tall bonnet scoop on there, it would just look a little bit too bulbous and a little bit too much out of place. I like the lower profile of the early 79 bonnet scoops better in this particular application. So how am I going to tackle this? Well, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to do all of these rust repairs. And the reason I'm doing those first is if I end up screwing this up and trashing this bonnet, I haven't already grafted that scoop on there and done all that work that will basically end up in the bin. So rust repairs first, make sure I do that properly. And once that's finished, then I can move on to grafting this scoop onto the 40 Series bonnet. I recently bought myself one of these little punches. I've never actually owned one before, but I'll tell you what, I rate them. And I'm using them just to mark where the spot welds are so I can use my spot weld drill and drill the spot welds out. Now you can see all along the front edge of this bonnet, it is all rotted out. So for me to be able to effect repairs in those rotted out areas, I've got to get this front brace off. And that front brace is spot welded in place. So I use the same method. I'll use my pick and the spot weld drills, and I'll take all of these out off the front of the bonnet, and I'll get that entire brace out of there. So I'm just going to continue going along here, drilling these spot welds out, and pull this frame assembly out of this bonnet. Okay, I believe this cross brace is now free. We're ready for removal. And there we have it, she's free. Now I've had this bonnet and all the panels sandblasted, and you can see the disadvantage with sandblasting You know, you can't fault the sandblasters. They just can't get the sand into these places. But have a look at that. If I finished restoring this car completely, it wouldn't be too long before that cancer would have continued to grow and wouldn't start to rust out on my brand new restoration. So that is one disadvantage with sandblasting when you've got panels that are lapped over top of one another. Have a look at that end. She's crusted right out. Bit of fabrication work to do on that brace. With that big crunchy little hole, and that panel is going to go right over top of it. Ooh, my black ice shirt's got a black hole. That's the quick way to ruin a t-shirt. One crusty and rusty section removed. And if I've measured it correctly, this should fit straight in. Excellent. Look at that. All right, I've got my 4 holes cut out, which are where the 4 patch panels are going to go. And I got my 4 patch panels constructed. 1, 2, 3, 4. That bonnet holder upperer has also got a hole rotted in it. So I've gone along the top and taken those 4 spot welds out, which got me that. And then I've drilled those 2 spot welds out on the bottom of it, which has got me that. So there's where my original hole was. So I'll chop that off and fabricate a new angle there. And this one here is looking a little bit crusty as well. So I think I'll probably fabricate a new one of those completely. That's the thing with rust, hey? It's like a gold mine. You keep digging and finding more. One more piece there that I'll need to replace. A little bit there. A couple of holes there. I'll have to cut a bit out. And there's quite a big hole there that needs to be chopped out as well. There's my little bonnet bracket. There's where it was all rotted out. Cut and fabricated myself a new piece. That'll take care of that bit of cancer. Then I can weld this back on. Then once this is done, I can weld it back on in its entirety onto the bonnet. All right, that bracket's all welded up now. And the way she goes is she spot welded right there. 1, 2, 3, 4 spot welds, and that bracket's done, all repaired, good as new. Quick coat of cold gal paint, and that will be good until I'm ready to paint it properly. So I've had a little bit of bubble of rust here that I've cut out, and you can see here that it's probably water caught between the outside skin and this brace here. Now rather than just weld a patch panel over that, I'm going to pull that entire brace out because I suspect underneath of there's going to be a little bit of crustiness and perhaps some cancer the whole way along. The other thing is I'm not sure, but that brace might interfere with some of the inside bracing for the scoop. So for those 2 reasons, I'm going to pull that brace out of there. Now before pulling that brace out, I'm actually going to weld in these patch panels. And the reason for that is I want to preserve some of the structural integrity of this bonnet or hood. Because right now, she's pretty bloody floppy, having pulled all of those braces out of there. Don't know whether the camera can pick it up, but just resting on top of this stand, it's already bowing this little bit of metal out. So she's floppy, and I want to make it as rigid as possible before I go ahead and pull out that final brace. All right, all of those patch panels are just tacked in place now. I'm going to go over to that back brace and remove that. Okay, I got the spot welds drilled out of that brace. There's 8 here in the middle and 2 at either ends. Got it. So the ends are pretty rusty. But the center of this thing's not too bad. And the same thing with the center of the bonnet. That's not too bad either. But up at either ends, where the water sits, that's all rusty and crusty and it'll need replacing. Cool. Progress. I like it. I've cut out a couple of more pieces out of this bonnet where I have to weld in some patch panels. One here, and one here. Then I've got a couple of very small holes I've got to fill as well. So I'm going to tackle welding all of those patch panels in fully now. This is going to take me hours. For you guys, it'll be seconds. See you shortly. All right, after an inordinate amount of time welding and grinding, I got those patch panels in. There's the one on the side, and there's the other 2 on the side. All right, I can flip that bonnet over now and work on that brace that is just about to bleed me dry. And you'll know what I'm talking about in a minute or so. Now I've got to move on and see whether I can rescue this bracket, or a good portion of it anyway. I don't think I'll probably need this middle brace because the scoop should have enough bracing, but I do need this front edge. That is spot welded onto this rusty bit. I'll see whether I can find out where those spot welds are. Got them. 1, 2, 3, and maybe a fourth one there, but certainly 3. So I'll drill those out so that I can remove this brace. Oh, that's gonna hurt. There's the rest of my arm in the drill bit. Nasty. Well, that's a pretty decent deep hole. You know, the one good thing about this though, it's on my right hand and I'm left-handed. So it will not impede my shed progress. Awesome. There, hopefully that'll contain most of the blood. Let's get back to this. All right, there we go. If I do use this brace, I'll obviously have to chop that out of there and replace that piece. But as I said, I'm not sure whether I'm actually going to need that or not. So we'll set that aside for now, because I definitely need this one. Bad cancerous chunk chopped out. And I've got a good piece in here to replace it. Okay, just an update on this bracket. I've chopped that piece out and welded a new piece in. There were a couple of holes on these two bends here, which I've now welded up. That's what that dodgy piece looked like that was there. And this end here was all ratty and rotted off, so I've made myself a new channel piece. And then I've got to mount this thing in the car to get that length correct. So I think there's probably about 1.5 inches missing there or so. And we'll fill it with that. And that will be this brace decancerized. Now, to determine what length this needs to be for me to fit that little patch panel in, I have to pop these brackets back into place. And to do that, I need to grind the back side of these welds down nice and flush so that I can get those brackets in there. And that is what the process is going to look like. Continue to grind that back until these brackets fit in where the original spot weld holes were. Okay, I got the front of the bonnet all ground down. I've cleaned up all the welds as best I can. I've got myself some rust converter here, which I'm going to spray down. And the instructions on this rust converter says that you can spray 2-pack epoxy primer over top of it. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. But I'll lay this down first because I don't know when I'm going to get to that 2-pack epoxy. Now these bracket pieces are sprayed with rust converter already. And now I'm going to go along and just take the tops of these spot welds off with the grinder and clean those off so I can do some welding. Now I'm going to clamp this bracket in place, which will very shortly become abundantly clear on why I'm doing this. This is where it originally sat, because that's where the spot weld holes all line up. I'll do the same for this side. And that is the piece that I'm missing. And there is the piece that I fabricated. Mark my cut. Okay, I'll cut that now. There's my missing piece. I'll spot weld that in place, then I'll take this bracket out of here, fully weld it, and then pop it back in for good. Okay, got my bracket all clamped in. Time to start some welding. All right, my bracket is all welded in now, and I've just hit that front edge of the bonnet with a bit of cold gal paint, just so I don't get any flash rust. Now, because I've got these two braces pulled out of the old bonnet, particularly this one that runs along the backside, I'm going to pop the bonnet back onto the car to make sure that the width is still correct. Because right now, there's no rigidity across that part of the bonnet, so it can actually fold in like this. And that looks like a good width from side to side on the car. That's the driver's side, that's the passenger side. So what that means is I can take a measurement from those two sides of the car, and I know that that is going to be the width of my bonnet. And that's going to be critically important, because as soon as I cut a giant hole in this bonnet, it can very easily fold in on itself. And if I was to weld the bonnet scoop on when it is folded in on itself, then the width of the bonnet's going to be all out of whack. What I've done is I've just temporarily whacked this brace back in place. It's not spot welded or anything like that, because I suspect it'll probably be in the road of the hole that I've got to cut for the bonnet. If that's the case, I'll weld a temporary brace across this top flange, but I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. At least with this brace in place, I know that the bonnet at the back edge here is spread out to the width that it needs to be. Time now to move over to the 79 series bonnet and start to deconstruct that one. Now I've just got these cheap little trim tools that I picked off of eBay for, Jesus, I don't know, a few bucks, that I use to pull all these clips out. Sometimes it can be a bit tricky to find where the tangs are, and I used to pop them out because they do have two little tangs on them. There it is. So the way that trim tool works is when you pop it in there, it pushes those two little tangs in like that and allows you to pop that clip out. All right, let me finish these off and I'll see you guys in a bit. I've also got to remove the trim pieces that are holding in this scoop affair. And those clips are exactly the same as the other ones, just a little bit smaller, that's all. Fair number of these holding the scoop on. There she is. Now this little heat protector, if that's what you want to call it. For all those that own a 79 series, that's what the underside of your little heat shield looks like. Next I got to remove these little 10mm nuts. And these guys hold the insert in. And if you don't know what I mean by the insert, you'll see that shortly. The only reason that I semi-know what I'm doing here at the moment is because I did this with my 200 series. So I am a bit familiar with these 79 series bonnets. And now we've got this little clip is the remainder of the clips. I think the post August 18 have two of these from my recollection. You can see now that scoop is a little bit floppy in there and she's ready to come out. And that is what I mean by the insert. 970mm at its widest point on these two little ridges. And the width of that bonnet scoop at its widest point is about the same. It's about 970mm. So that's going to be reasonably squeezy. I think what I'll do next is I'll take my angle grinder and I'll go along the perimeter of the skin and separate the internal skin from the external skin. Because I don't know how much of this internal I'm going to be able to use, but I want to use as much as possible because that's where all the structural integrity is. One side down, 3 to go. Take that disc back for a warranty claim. 2 sides done. 3 sides done. Suck the guts out of that battery. That's another disc warranty claim. Far out. 4 sides done. Now, holding this inside skin and the outside skin together are these little daubs of goo, and they call this stuff anti-flutter compound. The good thing about it is it's super soft, so you can just get a putty knife in there and split it without damaging or denting the outside skin. Most of them you can reach. There's a couple that are in a little tricky spots that you can't quite get to, but you'll see how I manage those in a second once we go to peel this skin off. Go along and make sure the skin is split the entire way, which it is. Now, there's a couple of spots where that anti-flutter is still located. Places hidden like here. But if I can peel up this skin, this inner skin, to allow me to get my knife inside of there, then I should be able to pull it off. Now, being that safety conscious individual that you all know and love, I'm going to put a pair of gloves on because I feel I could get carved up with this. Now I got that one bugger that I knew was going to give me some grief. Got him. Okie dokie. One inner skin and one outer skin. Let me go around and get this rest of this anti-flutter crap off. We'll flip it over and see whether I've done any damage. I don't think I have. Beautiful. There she is. No damage whatsoever. Check that out. Sweet. Well, I got the bonnet skin sitting on top of the FJ45 bonnet now, and it's roughly centered. So here are my observations, and I'm talking out loud, so I might be dribbling a little bit of shit here, but bear with me. Inside here are the louvers, and I'd like to keep the louvers, and they end right about here. So that side of the scoop looks like it will fit in between the louvers. Just double checking the other side, making sure that I've got it centered. Yep, that's the case. Somewhere right around there is where the louvers end. So that'll allow me to mold that in and not impact those louvers. You also know that the FJ45's got this hump that runs down the center of the bonnet, basically from the front almost all the way to the back. That's going to disappear as well when I cut the giant hole in the bonnet. Now you can see where the FJ45 bonnet ends and the 79 bonnet ends. And there's probably 8, maybe 10 inches that I'm going to have to whack off the front of this thing, which is no problem because the scoop actually finishes a fair distance back. So the FJ45 bonnet ends right about there. That'll leave me plenty of room for that transition. That's no worries. I think the trickiest bit is going to be molding this bonnet to get that curve. Not impossible, but it's going to be a bit tricky. That's my thought process at the moment. I'm going to stare at this now for probably quite a bit longer before I actually do anything because I've got to get this clear in my mind. You get one chance with these. What do they say? Measure twice, cut once? I'm going to think 3 times and cut once. I hope. Now, what I'm going to try and do is start chopping off some of this excess metal just to get this down to a little bit more of a manageable size that I can wrap my head around. So what I did is I measured from the front of the bonnet here out about 20 mil, and that's where I've run my tape line. So I'm going to cut on the inside edge of this tape line to take that entire front section off, and that'll make it a little bit easier for me to move around and wrap my head around. I'll just take off a few little bites so that I can see under there a little bit easier. Keep that for my scrap pile. Now that I can see in there a little bit easier, I can see that if I chop along the front edge of the FJ45 bonnet, I'll be able to mold this skin in just perfectly. Now I've got to try and deal with these sides, that louver down the bonnet, and the hump here on the top. All right, I'm going off to thinking land. Stay tuned. The next thing I've resolved to do is just chop this little square out of here. And the reason for that is sitting proud and it's holding my scoop up, and it means I'm just having a little bit of difficulty wrapping my head around the contours. All of this is ultimately going to get chopped out anyway, but I'll just chop this small piece out of here for now, so that I can drop that scoop down and it can lay along the front edge of this bonnet like it's supposed to. All right, place our skin back on. That's better. That whole front edge is laying flat now. Okay, I've been doing a little bit more mental gymnastics, and there's 2 things that I can do here. Either I cut that out of the original FJ bonnet, whole raised section out of the bonnet, or I leave it there, that's about where the scoop sits, and I build this up and radius it around here. What that means is this whole scoop will drop down probably about an inch. Then I'm a little bit concerned about clearance in the engine, especially down here on the supercharger hat and down here. Right now the bonnet fits, but if you can imagine I take another inch and that scoop drops down an inch, it may actually foul. So somehow I've got to work out how I can determine whether that will foul or not without chopping that up yet. Okay, I think I've worked out how to do that. I am going to cut an inspection hatch in there, and that is basically where the hole is on the scoop for the 79 series. Then when I put this bonnet back on the car, that should give me an idea of what my clearances look like. Okay, choppy choppies. I'll just set that supercharger cover aside. That opens things up a bit. Yeah, I think I am gonna have the clearance I need. I still have bucket loads of room in there. Okay, I got that bonnet insert in there just to make sure that that doesn't cause me any clearance issues. And it doesn't. And I do have quite a bit of room between that supercharger and the rest of the componentry that will go in the engine. And I don't think that inner skin will cause too much drama either. So I think I'm pretty good as far as clearances go. That being the case, I reckon I can chop that 1 inch across the top here to drop that skin down so that it lays flat with that there and with that there. Okay, now I'm in a position where I can cut these 2 chunks off on either side, get that excess material away, and get me a little bit closer to visualizing where I need to be. Sides chopped off. Now we can see the louvers that I want to retain. So that is going to have to be cut probably back about there to keep those louvers. And you can see the body lines that we've got. I got a flat here, then it goes up, and then another flat, and then the scoop. So it looks as to me that I'm going to have to cut it pretty bloody close to the edge of that scoop all the way along. So I've been staring at this thing for an eternity, and it is starting to crystallize in my mind a little bit. First of all, just looking at the scoop front to back, where it's sitting right now, it's much too far forward for my liking. These are where the original bonnet hinges bolt down onto the bonnet. I think what I'm probably gonna end up doing is chopping off that, and that, so that I get to that surface, and then drill in new bonnet mounts on the back of this scoop. I'll obviously have to reinforce that, but that's no big deal. That'll shift this thing back about 1 inch or 2. So let me move it now, see what it looks like from an eye's point of view. I'll lay these bonnet hinges down, and then lift the scoop up over top of them. That's about forward to back. Now when I do that, I like the way that that's sitting forward to back. Now that brings me to my next challenge. That's where the scoop comes down, and at that point it's okay. I can weld it onto the top of the bonnet, no worries. But as we come down here, you can see the scoop sitting here, and this ridge in the bonnet runs in. Now if you can imagine this skin laying down, I've got this big gap here, and that's gonna look all kinds of out of place. So what I'm contemplating now is cutting this piece out here, shifting this raised piece over to about here, and then that will allow it to weld onto the top of the scoop. So that basically means that part of the scoop runs down onto that seam, and out here, that seam sits about here. Now the reason this is such a drama at the moment is because the scoop is so wide. Now you might say, well, why don't I just chop the bonnet in half, section a piece out of it, and shut it? So the old cut and shut job. That would alleviate those problems completely. The problem with doing that is this plastic insert that sits in there like that. I don't have the skills to cut and shut plastic. Now you might say, well, that's fine, don't put it in there. But I actually like the look of that. I don't know why, but it sets the scoop off a little bit and makes it stand out a little bit. So I actually want to keep that. Now, if I did run a cut line along here and shifted that out here, would that look out of place? I don't think so, because I've run a piece of tape here and I've run it parallel to these louvers. If that runs down parallel to these louvers, that line actually works. And I think you can probably see it here. The distance between here and here is approximately the same as it is between here and here. So at the moment, the way that Toyota's got it designed is that line runs in. That's got a little bit of a curve to it. So I think I could get away with chopping that out and shifting it over. That would allow me to fit the wider scoop on, but that is going to push me to the limits of my capability. This will be easy enough because I've already got that curve, so I'm just going to cut it out of there and shift it over here and reuse it. The tricky bit for me is going to be fabricating that curve there. I'll give it a little bit more thought before I go any further. I think I'll probably cut the back of the bonnet off on that line, because regardless of what I do here, I do want to shift that scoop back as far as I can. Can you see the smoke coming out of my ears? Because I can certainly smell it.